Imagine this, a big political rally, maybe outdoors, loads of energy in the air, sea of faces, and you can just feel the anticipation. Then, boom, out of nowhere, chaos. A flash, maybe, a loud crack gunshots. And in that instant, that terrifying split second, you see a figure, let's say someone like a former president, maybe Trump, being rushed off stage. But what happens next? That's the really arresting part. Secret Service agents, these individuals, they don't just react, they instantly, instinctively, throw their bodies over him, literally becoming a human shield, putting their own lives right there between the danger and the person they're protecting. Seeing that, it just hits you with this really profound question, I think. And I bet it hits you too. Why? I mean, why would someone risk everything, maybe even just throw away their one and only life for another person? A person who, at the end of the day, is just as mortal as they are. These agents, they won't live to enjoy some big reward if they make that sacrifice, right? There's no long-term benefit for them in that moment. So what is it? What deep compulsion drives that? What makes them do it? Today, that's exactly what we're going to dig into. We're doing a deep dive, trying to get way past those easy answers, the it's their duty or they get paid well kind of responses. We really want to explore the deep psychological and, even philosophical roots of extreme self-sacrifice. What's really going on there? And what can it tell us about, us?
That is a really powerful starting point, isn't it? Because it throws us right into this question that feels very human, but it's actually much more complex than it first looks. It's definitely not just about a job description, or fulfilling a contract. It really touches on these fundamental questions about what motivates us as humans, our sense of duty, loyalty, the values we build our societies on. When you see something like that, it forces you to confront, the limits of your own understanding of courage, maybe, commitment, that kind of extreme dedication. And for this exploration, we've been looking into some really interesting source material, specifically a piece called Duty, Fanaticism, and the Pyramid of Sacrifice. It really promises to unpack these ideas, pulling out some key insights. It should give us a pretty solid framework, multi-layered, for understanding this stuff. The goal is to help make sense of acts of sacrifice that seem really different on the surface, from the heroic Secret Service agent, which seems straightforwardly noble, to acts that get labeled fanatical, even disturbing. It's about finding those common threads in human behavior, even when it gets really extreme or morally challenging.
Okay, right. So let's unpack it. Because when you first think about why those agents do that, your mind probably goes to the obvious stuff, doesn't it? Like, oh, it's their duty, or they signed up for this, or maybe even they get paid a ton of money for taking that risk. It's literally in the job description, take a bullet. But if you really stop and think about those explanations for a second, they just start feeling thin, kind of inadequate. I mean, let's be honest, right? Would you jump in front of a bullet just for your paycheck? Seriously. Would a huge bonus really make you consciously decide in a split second to throw away your only life, your whole existence? Most of us, if we're really honest, would probably say, no, that's just not enough. So, okay, duty and pay, they're part of the picture, sure, they get people into the job. But they don't explain that final, instantaneous leap into lethal danger. There has to be something else going on, something deeper.
You're absolutely right to push back on those initial, simpler answers. Duty, pay, yes. They're components that get someone to sign on the dotted line for a high-risk job, but they are completely insufficient, utterly, to explain why someone would make that instantaneous, self-annihilating sacrifice in the moment of crisis. The sheer, immediate, potentially catastrophic risk involved. It just demands a much deeper explanation, psychologically, philosophically even. Like you said, this isn't some rational cost-benefit thing happening in that split second. It's something else entirely. It operates on a level that's almost pre-conscious. And our sources, they suggest that the core mechanics behind this kind of extreme sacrifice, whether it's seen as heroic or something else, it really boils down to three incredibly powerful pillars. Three pillars of extreme motivation. And these aren't just separate things. They weave together, reinforce each other, creating this incredibly potent force that can override even that most basic instinct, self-preservation. These pillars are intense, specialized training, the almost magnetic power of a symbol, and a profound sense of honor and meaning, even in death.
Okay, let's tackle that first one then. Training rewires instinct. That sounds intense, especially when there's literally zero time to think. How does training go beyond just knowing stuff to actually creating that automatic physical override?
Precisely. And it's not just about knowing what to do intellectually. It's about embodying the response physically. It's like transforming how the body itself reacts under extreme pressure. Think of it as a kind of extreme conditioning. The body gets trained relentlessly, to move, before the conscious mind can even start processing the threat or weighing the personal cost. They use these repetitive high-stress simulations, trying to mimic real danger as closely as possible. And they drill these scenarios hundreds, maybe thousands of times, until that protective action becomes so deeply ingrained, it's almost reflexive. It completely bypasses conscious thought. So when the crisis hits, the body just reacts. The person isn't consciously thinking, okay, step one, step two, should I risk my life? No, the action's already happening. It's an instinct, but one that's been built through rigorous, deliberate practice.
Wow. So it's like muscle memory, but for life or death situations.
Exactly. Muscle memory is a great way to put it. We see it in other high-stakes areas too, right? First responders, elite soldiers, even top athletes. Think about a firefighter running into a burning building, or a soldier reacting to enemy fire, or even a pro tennis player returning a super fast serve. That's not calm, step-by-step thinking. It's the result of hours and hours, countless hours of repetition, deep procedural knowledge. For a Secret Service agent, this training turns that potential moment of freezing, where fear could just paralyze you, it turns it into immediate, decisive action. Yeah. They effectively become part of the protective system, their own self-preservation instinct, just temporarily overridden by this more powerful, trained response.
That makes a lot of sense. It's knowledge that lives in the body, not just the head. It short-circuits the fear. Powerful stuff. But then what about who or what they're protecting? That takes us to the second pillar you mentioned, the power of the symbol. You said they're not just protecting, say, Trump the man, they're protecting something bigger, right? Something more abstract.
Absolutely. And this gets into something really fundamentally human. Our ability to invest abstract ideas with huge meaning. So much meaning they command loyalty even beyond personal connection. It's fascinating how these abstract things you can't even really see, like democracy or the presidency, become so potent they can actually seem more important than individual lives. We don't just see democracy, do we? We internalize its values, its history, its promise. Things like institutions, flags, anthems, roles like president, ideas like rule of law. They aren't just words or objects. They become incredibly powerful symbols because we collectively fill them with meaning, with shared history, with our hopes for the future.
So the agent sees the president not just as this one person.
Exactly, not just as the individual currently holding the office. They see the president as a living symbol of continuity, stability, the legitimate authority of the whole democratic process. It's a symbol of the state itself, of the collective identity. Protecting that symbol, even if it costs your own life, transforms the act. It's not just personal protection anymore. It becomes a profound civic duty, a defense of the system, the nation, the millions of people it represents. This symbolic weight allows individuals to transcend their own personal fears, their instinct to survive. They're serving an ideal, a system they believe in. That gives their action a significance that no paycheck, no personal bond alone could ever match. It really shows how deeply we need to connect to things bigger than ourselves, doesn't it? To project value onto ideas and then commit completely.
It really does. And it makes you think, doesn't it, about the symbols in your own life that command that kind of deep loyalty. Maybe it's not life or death, but maybe it's your favorite sports team, that tribal feeling, or a family legacy you feel responsible for upholding, or even just a professional standard you refuse to compromise on, like a badge of honor.
We all have them. To some degree, that fundamental mechanism of attachment is there.
Yeah. And then the third pillar, this one feels maybe the most existential, honor and meaning in death. You said dying in that role isn't seen as a waste. It's actually remembered as the highest loyalty, not just by colleagues, but by society.
And this taps right into that universal human need for meaning, doesn't it? For significance, for our lives, and even our deaths, to matter, to resonate beyond just our own time here. Societies are incredibly good at this and very deliberate about it. They construct these powerful stories around sacrifice. They take what is objectively a tragic individual death, and they transform it into something meaningful, honorable, an act that echoes long after the person is gone.
How does that work practically?
Well, think about it. When an agent dies protecting the president, it's not just a sad event. It's consecrated, memorialized. There are state honors, public mourning. The story of heroism gets told and retold, enshrined in collective memory, maybe statues, names on memorials. This public recognition, this narrative, it provides a powerful reward, not a material one, obviously, but one that transcends individual survival. The person might be gone, but their legacy, their ultimate act of loyalty lives on. It becomes part of the bigger story. It confirms that their life, even ending that way, contributed to something greater and will be remembered as noble, brave, significant. It feeds that deep desire we all have to belong to something enduring, to leave a mark even when facing death. It's why we tell stories of heroes and martyrs across all cultures, all history. It reinforces our values.
It sounds incredibly noble when you lay it out like that. Those three pillars, the training that rewires instinct, the immense power of the symbol, the honor and meaning found even in death, they create this potent mix for self-sacrifice. It's deeply human. But then another thought creeps in. It feels a bit unsettling. Isn't that exact same structure, that same psychological engine, also at work in what we usually call religious fanaticism? How close is that parallel, really?
That is a really crucial question. And yes, it's deeply uncomfortable for many people to consider. We tend to view these things through completely different lenses, don't we? One act is heroic, noble, necessary. The other is disturbing, irrational, maybe even evil. But if we can manage to step back from our immediate judgments just for a moment and look at the underlying mechanisms, we start to see this profound structural similarity. The context is different, the moral outcomes are vastly different, the specific symbols are different, absolutely. But the underlying psychological machinery, the human engine driving someone to extreme self-sacrifice, it shares these fundamental elements. And grappling with this comparison, as uncomfortable as it is absolutely essential if we want a deeper, more objective understanding. It forces us to check our biases.
Okay, let's go there then. Let's make the comparison head on, even if it feels provocative. Think about a religious martyr. What comes to mind? Usually someone totally devoted, right? Willing to die for their beliefs, often with this intense sense of purpose. And when you apply those three pillars we just talked about, training, symbol, honor, and death, the parallels are, well, they're pretty striking, almost disturbingly so.
This is where the source material offers that really challenging but vital insight.
Yeah.
Structurally speaking, the Secret Service agent and the religious fanatic are operating with the same basic psychological toolkit. We're talking about the fundamental human capacity for extreme commitment, for self-negation, for giving everything, including life itself. The core difference, as you hinted, isn't in the how of the sacrifice, the psychological mechanism, but in the what. The object of that sacrifice, the specific symbol, the cause, the belief system they've aligned themselves with. That human drive to dedicate your life, even your death, to something you perceive as larger than yourself. That's the common denominator here.
Okay, so break that down. How do those shared mechanisms play out for, say, a religious martyr?
Let's take training first. Now, it might not be literal drills with guns like the Secret Service, but there is absolutely a profound, pervasive kind of training involved. It comes through intense indoctrination, maybe starting very young, repeated exposure to an ideology, sacred texts, specific rituals, constant reinforcement from the community. The individual gets immersed in this belief system that shapes their entire reality, their morals, their social bonds, everything. It prepares them, psychologically, for certain actions, certain sacrifices. Their mind, their identity, it gets conditioned, much like the agent's body, to respond in a certain way when core beliefs are challenged or when that moment for ultimate devotion arrives.
Yeah.
It shapes their whole mental landscape.
Makes sense. It's mental and spiritual conditioning, not just physical. What about the symbol?
For the religious fanatic, the symbol is often ultimate, transcendent. It could be God, the true faith, paradise, the sacred cause, the prophet, maybe a divinely ordained caliphate. These become the absolute, all-encompassing symbols demanding total, unquestioning loyalty. This symbol isn't just part of their life, it is their life's framework. It gives meaning to everything, every action, every suffering. It's the ultimate reality, the only guiding principle. And for that symbol, nothing, not even their own life, is too high a price. It dictates their purpose, their identity, their destiny.
And the third pillar, honor and meaning in death.
Again, the parallel is strong. For the religious martyr, dying in service of that ultimate symbol is almost universally glorified within their community. It's not seen as a tragedy or defeat. Often it's portrayed as the highest act of devotion, the peak of worship. It promises immense spiritual rewards, eternal paradise, maybe, and a revered place in the community story for generations. Their sacrifice isn't just about their own salvation. It contributes to the greater glory of the cause, their God, the community's ultimate victory narrative. The idea of a wasted death just doesn't exist in that context. Instead, it's seen as the most meaningful, most impactful way to end their earthly life, guaranteeing a legacy beyond time.
So the engines are the same. The psychological drivers, training, symbol, honor, they operate in fundamentally similar ways. The only difference, like you said, is which symbol they attach themselves to. That seems so simple on the surface, but wow, the implications are huge. And yeah, uncomfortable.
Exactly. You've got, on one hand, the president representing the democratic state versus, on the other, God representing eternal paradise, or continuity of the secular state versus eternity in the afterlife. The underlying mechanism, the willingness to give one's life, it looks identical. But that crucial point of divergence, the thing that makes us judge them so differently, often with intense emotion, is entirely about the object of the sacrifice. And this forces us to confront that uncomfortable truth. Our judgment about whether an act is honorable or fanatical is deeply shaped by our own relationship with the symbol being defended. Do we value it? Do we reject it? It means, psychologically speaking, these aren't fundamentally different types of human acts at their root.
Which really messes with our usual black and white thinking, doesn't it?
It really does. It challenges those easy moral categories. It suggests that instead of a simple good guys versus bad guys, based on the psychological drive, there's more of a spectrum, a continuum of human commitment and symbolic alignment. Now, this is crucial. This doesn't mean all actions are morally the same. Absolutely not. The consequences, the impact on others, the nature of the symbol itself, these are critically important for ethical judgment. But it does make it harder to just dismiss one act as totally alien or crazy while praising another, when the internal human engine might be so similar. It pushes us to admit that our admiration or outrage often comes not just from the act itself, but from our own cultural baggage, our own alignment with the symbol involved. It forces a more nuanced view beyond just gut reactions.
So here it is, the really uncomfortable question for you listening right now. If that core psychological drive, those three pillars, are basically the same, then is the difference between what we call honor and what we call fanaticism really just about whose symbol we happen to respect? Or maybe even simpler, is it just about whether we agree with the cause the person is dying for? That really makes you pause, right? How much is our judgment just tribalism, our own totems?
That question absolutely cuts right to the core of our biases, doesn't it? It forces us to look at those cultural and personal lenses we view the world through. Lenses we often don't even know are there until something challenges them. Our immediate judgment so often hinges entirely on whether we align with the symbol being championed or not. If we value the presidency, the democratic system, we instantly see the agent as a hero. If we reject a certain religious ideology, we might instantly label its follower a fanatic or terrorist. Again, this isn't to erase the vital ethical distinctions. Those are real. But we have to acknowledge the subjective starting point of our judgments, how much they're shaped by our own background.
It's a call for some serious self-reflection.
Definitely. I genuinely encourage you listening to pause and think. What symbols do you automatically respect? Which ones do you automatically condemn? What causes spark instant admiration? Which ones provoke instant rejection? And more importantly, why? What deep values, beliefs, allegiances are behind those reactions? Doing that kind of self-check is critical. It shows how deeply ingrained our frameworks are, how much they steer our initial moral compass. And it perfectly sets up why we then need philosophy, those structured ethical frameworks, to try and navigate this tricky moral territory, to try and move beyond purely relative gut-level judgments.
Exactly. This is where we shift gears, right? We move from psychology and sociology describing how things are into philosophy, which grapples with how things should be judged. Because when you're facing that uncomfortable question, is it just whose symbol we respect, philosophy offers basically two main paths forward, and they represent this fundamental tension in ethics.
Absolutely. A fundamental tension. Do we just accept that all moral judgment is relative? Relative to our group, our culture, our time? Or do we believe we can find, or at least strive for, universal standards, some kind of ethical bedrock that applies everywhere, to everyone? Philosophers have been wrestling with this for centuries. It's about moving beyond just describing what people do, to actually evaluating why they do it and what it means morally in a way that aims to be more objective, more universally defensible.
Okay, so path number one, the relativist view. This comes more from sociology, like you said. And from this angle, looking at extreme sacrifice, all these acts, heroic, fanatical, whatever label we use, they basically look the same underneath, functionally equivalent.
That's the sociological lens, yeah. It observes these acts of sacrifice primarily as powerful mechanisms for group cohesion, for building identity, reinforcing shared values, policing boundaries. It notes that pretty much every group, every tribe, nation, religion elevates its own symbols, celebrates its own martyrs as heroes or saints, and almost always labels the martyrs of other groups as fanatics, terrorists, heretics, or just plain wrong. It's a descriptive view. It says, look, this is how human societies work. This is how groups define themselves and create moral order. It explains why different groups see the same actions so differently, because their core symbols, their totems, their stories are fundamentally different.
So it explains the you, us, theirs versus them mentality around sacrifice.
Precisely. Think about any major conflict in history. Both sides genuinely believe they're fighting for what's right: justice, freedom, God, survival. Their fallen soldiers are revered, honored, remembered as patriots. But from the other side's perspective, those same acts of sacrifice might be seen as aggression, delusion, barbarism. The relativist view doesn't say who's right in some ultimate sense. It just explains that these labels, hero, fanatic, are overwhelmingly applied based on group loyalty. And the implication is, if this is the only lens we use, then yeah, maybe honor and fanaticism are just labels, social constructs based on where our loyalties lie, which can feel a bit unsatisfying, maybe even cynical, because it seems to remove any objective moral ground.
Right. It explains why we judge, but not necessarily how we should judge, which is exactly where the philosophers come in and say, hang on, can we do better? Can we find some universal standards, some principles that apply beyond our own tribe? And that's the principled view.
And that is the great ambition of ethical philosophy, to move beyond just observing these social dynamics and try to establish criteria for judgment that aim for universality, criteria that could apply regardless of culture or specific symbol. It's trying to develop a moral compass that isn't just pointing towards our own group's values. It acknowledges the relativist point. Yes, people do judge based on their group, but then it asks the tougher question. Is there something more fundamental? Can we objectively say some sacrifices are morally better, more justifiable than others, based on principles that any reasonable person could accept? It's trying to bring rational, universal judgment into something that often feels purely emotional or tribal, finding common ethical ground.
Okay, so if we're trying to draw those universal lines, trying to apply these principles, the sources lay out 4 major philosophical frameworks, like different tools in a kit. Let's get into these, because they offer really different ways to look at sacrifice. First, utilitarianism. The basic idea is judge by the outcome. Does the sacrifice do the most good for the most people, or cause the least harm overall?
Exactly. Utilitarianism is all about consequences. It's a consequentialist theory. The moral value of an action is judged solely by its results. Does it maximize overall happiness, well-being, or pleasure, and minimize suffering for the greatest number of people involved? If an act of sacrifice leads to a net positive outcome, saves more lives than it costs, prevents widespread suffering, promotes the greater good for the majority, then, from a utilitarian standpoint, it's morally justified. Even if the individual making the sacrifice suffers terribly, the ends justify the means, essentially.
So the Secret Service agent.
Could be seen as highly moral in utilitarian terms. Saving a president responsible for millions potentially preserves stability and well-being for the greatest number. The agent's sacrifice serves a larger perceived good.
And the fanatic causing mass casualties.
Unequivocally condemned by utilitarianism. The consequences are massively negative. Huge suffering, terror, destruction, with no outweighing benefit for the many. The pros of this approach: it's practical, focuses on tangible results, can help make tough choices in policy or emergencies. The cons: it can feel cold, potentially reducing people to numbers. It might overlook individual rights if violating them seems to serve the greater good, like that classic thought experiment. Sacrifice one innocent person to save 100. Pure utilitarianism might say yes, which feels deeply wrong to many people because it ignores the inherent worth of that one life.
Yeah, it forces you to weigh the numbers. So have you ever found yourself judging something just by the results, thinking, well, it worked out okay in the end, even if the process was questionable? It's a common way we think. Okay, next framework is almost the opposite. Kantian ethics. This one says, judge by universal duty and respect. Does the act treat all people as ends in themselves, never just as means to an end?
Right. Kantian ethics, from Immanuel Kant, shifts the focus completely away from consequences and onto duties, rules, and intentions. For Kant, a moral act is one done purely from a sense of duty. Following a rule you could rationally will everyone else to follow in all situations. That's the core of his categorical imperative. And a key part of this is always treating humanity in yourself and others as an end in itself, possessing inherent dignity and worth, never merely as a tool or instrument to achieve some other goal.
So how does that apply to sacrifice?
The sacrifice is noble if it upholds a universal moral duty, like protecting innocent life, applied universally and crucially, if it doesn't treat people, including the ones sacrificing, as mere pawns for some larger goal. The Secret Service agent, acting from a universalizable duty to protect the office and the lives depending on it, while still respecting the president as a person, not just a symbol, might pass the Kantian test. It's about fulfilling a duty. But a fanatic who uses others, or even themselves, as just a means to achieve a symbolic or religious end, say, harming infidels to gain paradise, fails fundamentally. They're treating people as instruments, denying their inherent worth as ends in themselves. The strength here is the strong emphasis on individual rights, dignity, justice, and good intentions. It gives clear moral boundaries. The weakness: it can be rigid. What if duties conflict? What if following the rule leads to terrible consequences? And judging intent is always tricky. But it asks you, Do you believe some things are just plain right or wrong, period, no matter what happens afterwards? Because of the principle involved.
That's a very different feel. Focus on the principle, the duty, the respect. Okay, third framework, public reason. This comes from more recent thinkers like Rawls and Habermas, thinking about diverse societies. The question here is, judge by what can be explained and justified, using reasons that everyone in a pluralistic society could potentially understand and accept.
Exactly. This framework is tailored for societies like ours, where people have wildly different beliefs, religious, moral, philosophical, and asks, can the justification for an action be made in terms that are public, accessible, and potentially agreeable to all reasonable citizens, not just those who share your specific private beliefs? It's about finding a common ground for moral justification in a diverse public square.
So, the Secret Service agent's duty.
Can likely be justified in public reason terms. Protecting the head of state, ensuring stability, upholding the rule of law. These are arguments most citizens can understand and accept as important for the common good, regardless of their personal faith or politics. It protects a shared civic function.
But the fanatic sacrifice based on, say, specific scripture.
That might struggle under public reason. If the justification relies solely on religious doctrines or promises of an afterlife that aren't shared or even comprehensible to those outside that faith, then it's not publicly justifiable. It lacks that common, accessible reasoning. The strength is promoting fairness and cohesion in diverse societies, finding shared rational ground. The weakness. It might struggle with deeply held personal convictions, moral or religious, that aren't easily translated into purely secular public terms. It could potentially sideline legitimate motivations if they don't fit the publicly rational mold. So it asks you, when you argue about tough issues, do you try to find reasons everyone can grapple with? Or do you stick to arguments based only on your own group's beliefs?
That's really relevant today, isn't it, finding that shared language?
Okay.
Last one, virtue ethics. This goes way back to Aristotle and the Greeks. The focus here is judge by the character demonstrated by the act and the kind of community it helps build.
Virtue ethics shifts the focus again. It's less about the rules of the action or its consequences, utilitarianism, and more about the moral character of the person acting and the impact on the community's overall flourishing, or eudaimonia, it asks. What kind of person does this act reveal? Does it demonstrate virtues like courage, justice, wisdom, loyalty, compassion? And does it contribute to building a good, thriving society? The right action flows from a virtuous character and helps cultivate virtue in others.
Applying this, the Secret Service agent.
Seen as demonstrating virtues like courage, loyalty, civic duty qualities widely seen as essential for a good society. Their act reinforces trust, upholds important values, inspires others. It contributes to communal flourishing.
In the fanatic.
Even if their act shows personal bravery or devotion. Virtue ethics would look at the bigger picture. Does it cultivate hatred, intolerance, destruction, division? If so, even with individual courage, it fails the virtue test because it promotes vices and harms the community's potential for flourishing. It's not just about the act, but the character and community it shapes. The strength is its holistic view, focusing on being a good person, building a good society. The weakness can be subjectivity. What counts as a virtue or flourishing can differ. But ask you a deep question. What kind of person do you want to be? What virtues matter most to you? And do your actions, big and small, actually align with building that kind of character and community?
Wow. Okay, those four frameworks, utilitarian, Kantian, public reason, virtue ethics, they really do give you different angles. And it's clear, like you said, applying them to the same act might lead you to emphasize different things, maybe even reach slightly different conclusions. It's not simple.
Absolutely not simple. And the point isn't really to pick one and say this is the only right way to think. That would miss the richness of it all. The real insight, the wisdom here, is understanding that you have these different tools available for thinking critically about sacrifice, or any moral issue, really. Each tool illuminates different facets, asks that are crucial questions. Knowing them helps you move beyond just a gut reaction to a more considered, more robust judgment. It builds understanding.
And that leads perfectly into this metaphor the sources use, the pyramid of sacrifice, which I think is a brilliant way to visualize how all these ideas fit together, like a pyramid with 3 levels.
It's a really helpful mental model, yeah.
Yeah.
It helps us see where different kinds of judgment come from, how they stack up. It lets us separate out the basic human psychology from the cultural interpretations and then the ethical evaluations. It clarifies the layers of analysis.
Okay, so at the base of the pyramid, the foundation, that's universal psychology. That's where we started. Training plus symbol plus honor meaning. The basic human wiring.
Exactly. That's the common ground. The raw psychological engine that makes extreme sacrifice possible for humans. It applies to everyone, potentially. Same for everyone, soldier or fanatic, as the source puts it. This level acknowledges that deep down we all have this capacity to be motivated in these extreme ways. It explains the how, the underlying human possibility. It's the engine itself, neutral until directed.
Then, moving up to the middle layer, we get sociological relativity. This is where interpretations diverge based on the group. Your tribe calls it duty, my tribe calls it fanaticism.
This is where culture and society shape our perception. It explains why different groups will praise or condemn actions that might stem from similar psychological roots. It's the us versus them layer. Labels like hero, martyr, fanatic get slapped on based on group loyalty, shared values, perceived threats, or benefits. This is where our ingrained biases and immediate emotional reactions often operate. It filters the meaning through the lens of community and tribe.
And then, right at the top, the peak of the pyramid, philosophical frameworks. These are our conscious, rational efforts to draw universal lines, to say, okay, beyond tribal labels, can we judge if some sacrifices are truly better, more justifiable than others, using universal principles?
Precisely. This is where we deliberately engage ethical reasoning. We bring out those tools, utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, public reason, virtue ethics, trying to apply universal principles and reasoned judgment. This top level is the should layer. We're trying to evaluate moral worth, using reason, aiming for judgments that transcend just cultural conditioning or gut feelings. It's the hardest level, requires the most thought, but it's where we strive for ethical clarity.
So putting it all together with our examples, the Secret Service agent and the fanatic, they stand on the same psychological base, driven by training, symbol, honor. Then in the middle, society labels them completely differently depending on who's doing the labeling. And then at the top, we judge them differently depending on which philosophical tool or combination of tools we choose to apply. That structure really clarifies things.
It provides real analytical power, doesn't it? It helps us untangle the shared human part from the societal interpretation from the ethical judgment. It allows for a much more nuanced discussion, getting past simplistic labels. It helps us avoid just dismissing something we dislike as crazy without understanding the drivers. Instead, we analyze it through the layers. Psychological root, societal context, ethical evaluation, allows for intellectual rigor, not just emotional reaction.
Okay, so that brings us to the huge question, maybe the ultimate question here. Which of those philosophical frameworks is best? Utilitarian, Kantian, public reason, virtue ethics? Is there one right answer? One true path?
The million-dollar question. Philosophers have been debating that for literally thousands of years. And the honest answer is, there's no simple consensus. No single master key fits every moral lock. Do we just naturally lean towards the one that fits our personality? Some people are very outcome-focused or utilitarian by nature. Others feel that pull of absolute principles, very Kantian. Others think more about character and community, like virtue ethicists. Our own intuitions definitely play a role. And that just highlights how complex morality is. Life throws incredibly messy situations at us. Trying to force every dilemma into just one framework often means ignoring important aspects that another framework would highlight. There probably isn't one single final answer that works for everyone, everywhere, all the time. The tension is just part of the human condition, maybe.
But here's the really useful insight, the practical takeaway from all this. You don't actually have to pick just one. Philosophy can be like a toolbox.
That is the profound wisdom right there.
Yeah.
Exactly. Think of a skilled woodworker. They don't just use a hammer for everything, do they? They have saws, chisels, planes, different tools for different jobs. It's the same with ethics. We can and probably should use different frameworks depending on the situation, the specific moral question we're asking, what aspects we need to focus on. Sometimes you need that utilitarian calculation, especially for big policy decisions. Sometimes you absolutely need Kantian principles to protect fundamental rights. Sometimes the long view of virtue ethics is crucial for thinking about character and community. And public reason helps us talk across differences.
So it's not about finding the one right tool, but knowing how to use all of them.
Exactly. Knowing their strengths, their weaknesses, when each one is most useful. It allows for a much more flexible, comprehensive, and ultimately more robust moral assessment. It stops us from being rigid or dogmatic. It equips you, the listener, with the intellectual capacity to think critically about really hard issues, rather than just defaulting to one viewpoint. It's about being adaptable, discerning, using the right tool from the philosophical kit for the job at hand.
So the real wisdom isn't finding the one best philosophy, but developing. Moral dexterity, knowing when to use which tool, like that craftsman.
Moral dexterity, I like that. It's not about wishy-washy relativism where anything goes, not at all. It's about moral sophistication. It's the ability to look at a complex situation and analyze it from multiple valid ethical angles at the same time to see, okay, from a utilitarian view, this looks maybe okay, but wait, Kantian principles raise a huge red flag about rights here. And what does virtue ethics say about the kind of people this action encourages? That multifaceted analysis is so crucial in our complex world, with all its moral gray areas. It helps us avoid those simplistic knee-jerk judgments and fosters a more thoughtful, nuanced, and responsible approach to the toughest questions life throws at us, engaging the full spectrum.
So let's bring it back. Next time you see an act of extreme sacrifice, maybe it is a guard, maybe a soldier, maybe even a religious devotee acting out of deep faith, remember the pyramid. It gives you that structure to understand what might be going on beneath the surface.
Remember those three levels. First, the same universal psychological base training symbol, honor driving commitment. Second, the relative middle layer, shaped by society, where labels like hero or fanatic get assigned based on whose side you're on. And third, right at the top are philosophical attempts to judge, using tools like utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, public reason, virtue ethics to evaluate the moral worth. Understanding that structure helps move beyond just the immediate, often biased emotional reaction to a deeper, more critical understanding. It's a path from gut feeling to informed analysis.
And maybe the real work, for you listening, isn't just about judging other sacrifices from the outside, condemning or glorifying. Maybe the deeper challenge is to turn that pyramid inward, to ask yourself, what symbols or causes do I align my life to? What core values really drives me? And crucially, what philosophical framework, or maybe what combination of frameworks from that toolbox will I consciously use to measure the worth of my own actions and the actions I see around me in this complicated world?
That's a really powerful concluding thought, because it shifts the focus from just observing others to active self-reflection. Applying these insights to your own moral compass, your own choices, it's an invitation to critically engage with your own values, understand the why behind your commitments, and consciously choose how you want to navigate the ethical landscape. It's really an ongoing journey, isn't it? Building and refining your own moral framework, being that thoughtful craftsman of your own ethical life, rather than just accepting one off the shelf.